The dinner rush always came at the same time, as predictable as the sun setting behind the hill outside the small-town restaurant. Every evening, just after 6, the place filled with voices, clinking glasses, and the shuffle of busy footsteps. In the middle of all, this movement was a young waitress everyone simply passed by without much thought. She had worked here for months, and most people still couldn't remember her name. She didn't complain. She didn't try to stand out. She just kept moving from table to table, doing her work with quiet focus. She had a gentle face that always seemed a little tired, as if she had a lot on her mind but never spoke about it. Her hair was usually tied back in a loose ponytail, not because she cared about looking neat, but because it made her job easier. She walked with a calm, careful pace, holding her tray steadily, even when the noise around her grew overwhelming. Sometimes customers would smile at her, but more often they just handed her their orders without looking up. The restaurant wasn't a fancy place. It was known for its warm soups, homemade pies, and the small music lounge attached to it. Musicians passed through every weekend, some better than others, and the locals enjoyed gathering there to unwind after long workdays. The owners tried hard to make the atmosphere welcoming, decorating the walls with colorful paintings from local artists and keeping the lights soft and warm. It wasn't the kind of place where people dressed up. It was simple, homely, and familiar. The young waitress blended easily into this environment. She didn't seek the spotlight or draw attention to herself. Most days she arrived early, changed into her apron, tied her hair back, and started setting up the tables. She liked the quiet moments before customers came in. The stillness made her feel peaceful. She would hum softly to herself while placing napkins neatly, lining up cutlery, or wiping down the counter. These were the only moments of the day when she felt completely calm. But as the evening rush approached, the noise returned like a wave, and she stepped back into her routine. It wasn't a bad job, but it wasn't exciting either. Sometimes she wondered if this was all she would ever do. She didn't have many friends, and she didn't talk much at work. Not because she was unfriendly, but because she was naturally quiet. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did talk, it was usually only to ask what someone wanted to eat or whether they needed anything else. People often made assumptions about her. They thought she was shy or timid, or maybe just uninterested. But the truth was far different. Deep inside, she carried things she rarely shared. Memories, dreams, and a part of her life that she kept hidden because she wasn't sure anyone would understand. She had once been someone very different, someone confident, someone who believed her future, held something bright and meaningful. Life had changed, and she hadn't returned to that version of herself yet. On this particular evening, she moved steadily through the dining room, collecting plates and refilling drinks. The restaurant was unusually busy. A group of travelers had arrived earlier in the day, filling several tables and adding an extra layer of noise to the room. They were cheerful and energetic, though a bit loud, and their presence made the place feel more crowded than usual. As she reached their table, one of the guests made a joke to his friends, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. They all laughed. She didn't fully catch what he said, but she knew it had something to do with her. She had heard similar jokes before. Jokes about how she moved slowly, or how she always seemed distracted, or how she looked too gentle to be working in a place like this. She never reacted. She learned long ago that reacting only made things worse. She placed their drinks down carefully, kept her expression calm, and stepped away without saying a word. Someone else at the table whispered something under their breath, followed by a few snickers. She ignored it. She was used to being overlooked, underestimated, or lightly mocked. None of it surprised her anymore. But even though she handled it with quiet grace, moments like this still stung a little. Not because she cared what strangers thought, but because she knew they couldn't see who she really was. They saw a waitress with a soft voice and tired eyes. They didn't see the hours she spent after work walking home in the cold. They didn't see the small apartment she lived in, where she practiced music late into the night with headphones on so she wouldn't disturb the neighbors. They didn't know the reason she worked here was not because she had no dreams, but because life had taken an unexpected turn. There was a small stage in the lounge area next to the restaurant. From where she stood at the counter pouring drinks, she could see it clearly. The piano on the stage always caught her eye. It was old and had several scratches on its dark wooden frame, but it still had a quiet beauty to it. Musicians passed through every weekend, playing guitar, singing, or sometimes performing stand-up comedy. But the piano stayed untouched most nights. She often wondered what it would feel like to walk up there again, to place her hands on the keys and let the music flow the way it used to. But she never allowed herself to imagine it for long. The thought only made her heart ache a little. Her life right now wasn't about music. It was about paying bills, keeping her head down, and staying steady. She didn't have room for dreams, not anymore. As she wiped down the counter, the restaurant doors swung open again, letting in a cool rush of air. More people entered, and the noise level rose instantly. She took a deep breath and went back to work, weaving between tables with her tray. The clattering plates, conversations, and laughter blended together into a familiar background hum. She delivered orders to a family sitting near the window. The little girl at the table smiled up at her as she set down a plate of fries. For a moment, she smiled back, a small but genuine curve of her lips. Children were one of the few things that lifted her spirits. They didn't judge. They didn't make assumptions. They simply saw her as a kind person bringing them food. Nothing more, nothing less. As the evening went on, the travelers at the larger table became louder. Their laughter echoed through the room, and a few people glanced over at them with annoyance. The young waitress tried to stay patient. She touched her apron, making sure her notepad and pen were still tucked inside, then approached their table to check if they needed anything else. One of them gave an exaggerated sigh and rolled his eyes playfully when she asked if they wanted refills. His friends laughed at his reaction, as if it were the funniest thing in the world. She didn't say anything. She just nodded and walked back to the drink station. The restaurant owner, a kind older man with a warm personality, noticed the situation. He approached her quietly and asked if she was okay. She assured him she was. She appreciated his concern, but she didn't want anyone making a fuss. She had learned to deal with uncomfortable situations on her own. It was easier that way. Still, deep inside, she felt a small flicker of frustration. Not anger, just a tired feeling that came from being underestimated for so long. It wasn't the first time someone had treated her like she didn't matter, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. But tonight, something felt different. She couldn't explain it, but there was a strange tension in the air, like something unexpected was waiting to happen. She didn't know what it was, but she could feel it, faint but real. As she passed by the lounge area again, the host stood on stage, tapping the microphone. He looked slightly nervous. He announced to the crowd that the next performer had canceled last minute. The audience groaned in disappointment. The host tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but it didn't help much. The group of travelers started making suggestions loudly, throwing out random ideas about who should perform. One of them pointed toward the young waitress and shouted, something that made the whole group burst into laughter again. She paused for a moment, unsure whether to feel embarrassed or annoyed. The spotlight wasn't something she wanted, not like this, not with people laughing at her expense. She focused on clearing the nearby table, keeping her expression controlled. But even as she pretended not to hear, a tiny spark inside her flickered again. Not anger. Something else. She didn't know that tonight. The part of her she thought was gone forever, The part that once loved music fiercely was quietly waiting for its moment to return. The noise continued. Plates clattered, the host scrambled to keep the show moving. And she carried on with her work. No one in the room knew it yet. But everything was about to change. And the quiet waitress, the one everyone overlooked, was standing right on the edge of a moment that would reveal who she truly was. The night grew louder as more people filtered into the lounge area, carrying the energy of a weekend evening. The smell of warm food drifted through the air, mixing with laughter, scraping chairs, and the occasional clatter of dishes from the kitchen. It was the kind of noise that made the place feel alive, though sometimes overwhelming. The young waitress continued moving through it all, steady and quiet. Her hands worked automatically, writing down orders, carrying plates, refilling glasses, but her mind was alert. She could feel a shift in the atmosphere. Something was different tonight, though she couldn't explain why. The group of travelers sitting near the stage only grew rowdier as time passed. They had clearly been drinking for a while, and their voices were louder than everyone else's combined. Even from across the room, she could hear their jokes and playful teasing. They weren't cruel people, just the kind who forgot to lower their voices or think before speaking. Unfortunately, that made things harder for the staff. When she approached their table again, one of them was in the middle of telling a dramatic story. He waved his arms around so wildly he nearly knocked over a glass. His friends erupted in laughter. She stood there patiently with her notepad, waiting for them to notice her. When they finally did, one of them smirked. "Oh, look, she's back," he said lightly, as if announcing something funny. She ignored the comment. "Would you like anything else?" she asked politely. A few of them exchanged looks, then one raised a hand, pretending to think deeply. Maybe you can bring us another round for the table. And maybe a smile to go with it." His friends chuckled. She forced a small smile, not because she felt like it, but because she didn't want trouble. She had learned long ago that some customers believed they were being charming, even when they weren't. She nodded, stepped away, and went to place their drink order at the bar counter. She took a small breath. She could handle rude customers. She had done it many times before, but something tonight made her feel slightly more restless than usual. Maybe it was the noise. Maybe it was the way the light seemed brighter than normal. Or maybe it was because she had seen that empty piano sitting quietly on the stage for too long, as if it were waiting for someone to touch it. The host stood near the microphone, clearly stressed. The performer who was supposed to appear next had still not shown up, and the audience was losing patience. People were whispering, checking their phones, and glancing around the room. Open mic nights normally ran smoothly, but tonight was different. When the waitress delivered the drinks to the noisy table, the group cheered as if she had brought them something magical. One of them gave her a thumbs up, another clapped sarcastically, and another whispered something to the friend beside him, who tried and failed to hide his laughter. She didn't react. She simply placed the drinks down carefully and walked away as she moved toward the kitchen. She heard the host tap the microphone again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, clearing his throat, "we're still working on a little schedule issue here. Our next performer is stuck in traffic. We're trying to see if we have a volunteer in the crowd to keep things going." The crowd murmured. A few people joked loudly. Someone shouted something unintelligible. Then, from the traveler's table, a voice rang out clearly. "Let the waitress do it." More laughter followed. The waitress froze mid-step. She didn't turn around. She didn't want to show any reaction. Her heart thumped once hard, but she kept walking. The host gave an awkward chuckle, brushing it off. "That's funny," he said lightly. "But we'll see if anyone here actually wants to." Another voice cut him off. "Yeah, let her try." She swallowed. The laughter grew louder. She slipped into the kitchen and leaned against the wall for a moment, letting the noise fade behind her. She could hear the cooks talking, pans hitting stoves, and the sizzle of food being prepared. The kitchen felt like a different world, a loud one, but a different kind of loud. More controlled, more predictable. The owner walked over to her. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded automatically. "I'm fine. You sure?" He placed a hand on the counter, studying her face. "They're being a little much tonight. If you need a break, take one." "No, I'm okay," she said again, finding her voice steadier this time. He didn't push her. "All right. But if you need anything, you tell me." He gave her a reassuring smile before returning to the line. She appreciated his kindness. She wasn't used to people asking if she was okay. She wasn't used to anyone noticing her at all. After a minute, she stepped back out into the dining room, ready to continue her shift. But her eyes drifted to the stage again. The piano sat there, untouched and waiting. She felt something tighten in her chest, not fear, not sadness. Something in between. A mix of longing and hesitation. A memory flickered in her mind, faint but warm. The first time she had played in front of people. She had been young, confident, full of hope. Her fingers had danced across the keys effortlessly, and the applause afterward had filled her heart with so much joy it almost hurt. She had once believed music was the path her life would follow, but life had a funny way of shifting without warning. She looked away from the piano quickly, forcing herself to refocus on work. She grabbed a tray and began clearing empty tables. As she moved, she overheard conversations from customers. Some wondered why there was such a long break between performers. Others joked about volunteering themselves, but quickly admitted they were too nervous. Then she heard someone say, "Honestly, that waitress looks like she's scared of her own shadow. No way she'd ever go up there." She felt her throat tighten. She kept her face neutral and continued stacking plates. People didn't know her. They didn't know anything about her life. But they always assumed as she walked past the traveler's table again. One of them raised his glass toward her. "Hey, you got any hidden talents?" he teased with a laugh. "Or do you just do this?" She didn't answer. She simply walked on. The host returned to the stage and grabbed the microphone again. "All right," he said, trying to stay cheerful. "It looks like our performer might be even later than expected. So we're going to let the audience take over for a bit. If anyone wants to sing, tell a joke, do magic, anything at all, just come on up." A few people clapped half-heartedly. Others didn't react. One of the travelers raised his hand dramatically. "What if the waitress does it?" He shouted again. His friends laughed so loudly that a few nearby customers groaned. The host smiled politely. "Maybe she doesn't want to," he replied, trying to move the attention away from her, but the group wasn't done. "Come on," another said. "She looks like she needs a little fun." The waitress felt eyes turning toward her. A few people glanced curiously. She kept her gaze down and simply continued working. She wasn't embarrassed as much as she was tired of people assuming she was quiet because she had no voice. Tired of being treated like someone who couldn't possibly surprise anyone. She returned to the drink station, refilled a pitcher, and tried to calm the small storm inside her chest as she poured water into glasses. She heard the faint sound of the piano being lightly tapped by the host as he tested a key or two. The soft notes drifted toward her like a whisper. Something in her stirred, not loudly, just a delicate nudge. Her fingers twitched slightly, remembering the feeling of keys beneath them. The steady rhythm of a melody waiting to be born. She shook off the thought. It wasn't her place. She was here to work, not perform. People would laugh. They already were, still. She couldn't shake the feeling pulling at her. She caught herself glancing at the stage again, Almost involuntarily, the room buzzed with more chatter. The travelers were louder than ever, their laughter echoing across the walls. "Bet she's never even touched a piano," one of them said in a tone just loud enough for her to hear. She paused, her breath caught. Of all the things they had said tonight, that one hit differently. She placed the pitcher on the counter. Her hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but something else. Something warm and rising. A memory flashed again her, sitting at a piano, a room full of people watching, her heart swelling with music, applause filling her ears. She had touched a piano. She had lived through it, breathed through it, loved through it. She still could, but no one here knew that. And maybe, just maybe, she was tired of hiding. The host was still talking, trying to keep the crowd entertained. The noise from the traveler's table grew even louder. The waitress took a slow breath. She didn't make any decision yet. She simply let the possibilities settle in her mind. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine walking toward that stage. Just imagine it. She didn't know what she would do. She didn't know what the night would bring. But something inside her was waking up. Something that had been silent for far too long. And soon, very soon, the whole room would realize that the quiet waitress they overlooked had a story none of them expected. The crowd was starting to lose patience, and the host could feel it. The empty stage made the room feel incomplete, almost awkward. A music lounge without music was like a heartbeat skipping every other beat. People came here to relax, to unwind, to forget their long week. But tonight, they were left waiting, tapping their fingers on tables and glancing toward the stage every few seconds. In the middle of this growing restlessness, the young waitress moved quietly from table to table. She did her job the same way she always did, steady, polite, unnoticed. But inside, she felt anything but steady. Her mind couldn't let go of the comments from the traveler's table. They weren't the worst she had heard, but they cut into something deeper this time. Not because they insulted her work or her appearance. She was used to that. It was the assumption that she had no talent, no story, no depth. As if she were just a silent background figure in their night. She wiped down a table, trying to focus. But her eyes wandered again toward the stage. The piano sat there quietly, as if waiting for her. She remembered the last time she had played. It had been months ago, alone in her small apartment, late at night when she thought no one would hear. She had placed her fingers on the keys and let a simple melody flow out, just enough to feel that old warmth again. But she had stopped halfway through the song. It hurt too much, like touching something beautiful that wasn't part of her life anymore. Music had once been her world. It had been the thing that made her feel alive. But life had taught her to be practical. Dreams didn't pay rent. Dreams didn't solve real problems. So she had stepped away from music, slowly at first, and then completely. And yet, the ache never disappeared. Tonight, that ache felt louder. As she carried empty glasses to the counter. One of the travelers called out to her again. "There she is," he said with a laugh, raising his glass as if she were a celebrity. "Come on, show us what you got." His friends chuckled, nudging each other. She kept walking, pretending she didn't hear. Her cheeks felt warm, but she kept her expression calm. The host tapped the microphone again. "Folks, let's all stay patient, all right? We're going to figure something out." Someone in the back shouted, "Just put on music then." Another yelled, "It's open mic. Someone get up there." The host gave a strained smile. "Anyone who wants to give it a try, the stage is open. Don't be shy." The waitress placed the glasses gently behind the counter, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of something she couldn't explain. The piano was close enough that she could see the faint reflection of the overhead lights on its polished surface. She imagined walking up to it. She imagined the room falling silent. She imagined touching the keys again. Then she imagined laughter. Not applause. Not admiration. Laughter. And that stopped her. She shook her head slightly, trying to push the thought away. She had a job to do. She wasn't here to entertain anyone. She wasn't here to take risks or make bold decisions. She was here to work. That was it. She picked up a stack of menus and walked them to the front podium. The restaurant owner glanced at her, sensing her unease, but not wanting to push her too hard. Busy. Night, he said softly. She nodded. Don't let those guys get to you. Another small nod. You're doing fine. She managed a brief smile before turning away, but inside, something tugged at her, a gentle pull that kept drawing her eyes back to the stage. The noise from the traveler's table rose again. Hey! One of them shouted, pointing toward her dramatically. I bet she's got something. Quiet ones always do. His friends roared with laughter. Someone else chimed in. Yeah. Maybe she can dance or sing or something. Their laughter blended into the rest of the crowd's noise. But for her, it felt sharper. She walked back toward the kitchen, trying to breathe through the tension building in her chest. But just before she pushed the door open, she stopped. She didn't know why. She stood there, one hand on the kitchen door, listening to the muffled sounds of the room behind her. Then, slowly, she turned her head. The piano was right there in her line of sight. The dark wood, the soft gleam, the bench tucked neatly underneath it. It looked lonely. She swallowed. Her heart was beating faster now, but not in a frightening way. More like the way her heart used to beat before a performance, quick, light, full of anticipation. She took a small step forward, then another. She wasn't thinking anymore. Or maybe she was thinking of too much at once. The music she once loved, the dreams she once had, the version of herself she once believed in. The laughter from the traveler's table didn't fade, but somehow it didn't feel as powerful anymore. Someone shouted again, "There she goes." Look, she's actually going. But for the first time tonight, their voices didn't make her hesitate. Instead, something strengthened inside her. She took another step. Her legs felt strangely light, as if her body had already decided before her mind did. The host spotted her approaching and blinked in surprise. He stepped aside, not wanting to draw attention to her, but also unsure what she intended. The room didn't go silent. Not yet. People were still talking, laughing, clinking glasses. A few noticed her walking toward the stage. A few nudged their friends. A few raised their eyebrows. The group of travelers burst into loud cheers and clapped. "Mockingly. The host leaned in slightly. Are you sure? He whispered. She didn't speak. She simply nodded once. Her stomach twisted nervously. Her hands were cold. But she stepped onto the stage anyway. She stood there for a moment, feeling the unfamiliar sensation of being looked at. She hadn't stood on a stage in front of people since her life had taken its turn. And now every second felt both overwhelming and strangely empowering. Her eyes lowered to the piano. That familiar ache returned, but this time it wasn't painful. It was comforting. Like a long-lost friend suddenly standing in front of her. She reached out and pulled the bench back quietly. The soft scrape of wood against the floor barely made a sound. The room began to hush. Not all at once, but gradually. As people noticed her sitting down. Her heart pounded hard enough that she could feel it in her fingertips. She rested her hands on her lap for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. Her fingers tingled. Her mind raced. She wondered what she must look like to the audience, just a waitress, sitting awkwardly at a piano. But then she closed her eyes, and everything around her softened. The noise dimmed. Lights faded in her mind. All she felt was the piano. Beneath her fingers, she let her hands rise slowly and placed themselves gently on the keys. They fit so naturally, it brought an unexpected warmth to her chest. The first note she pressed was soft, almost hesitant. Someone in the audience whispered, "Is she really going to play?" Then another note, and another, soft, familiar, comforting. A melody began to form, shaky at first, as if her fingers were waking up from a long sleep. The travelers' table chuckled quietly, but their laughter died almost immediately as the music grew stronger. The waitress opened her eyes and looked down at the keys. The room continued to quiet. The melody deepened. Her fingers moved more confidently now, finding a rhythm they hadn't forgotten after all. It was like her hands remembered a language. Her voice had stopped speaking. People leaned forward. Conversations faded. A couple near the kick front stopped eating and set their forks down. The host stared in disbelief. Slowly, the entire lounge fell silent. She didn't look up. Not yet. She stayed focused on the keys, letting the music guide her. It wasn't a complex song. It wasn't something she had practiced recently. It was the first melody she had ever learned, the one she used to play when she wanted to feel safe. And as she played, the room felt softer, warmer, like the music wrapped itself gently around everyone who listened. Her fingers moved with a tenderness she didn't even know she still had. The melody rose and fell beautifully, echoing through the room with a quiet power. She felt it. The audience felt it. Even the travelers felt it. Someone whispered, "Where did she learn to play like that?" Another murmured, "I didn't know she could do this." She played with her whole heart, not to impress anyone, not to prove anything, but simply because it felt like breathing. Again, every note was a step back into a world she thought she had lost. Every chord was a reminder that she still had something inside her worth sharing. When she finally lifted her hands off the keys, the last note lingered in the air like a held breath. For a second, just one, the entire room stayed completely still. No laughter, no chatter, no clinking glasses, just silence. Then, slowly, it happened. Applause, soft at first, then louder, then overwhelming. The room erupted. People stood. Some clapped with wide eyes. Some smiled in disbelief. Even the travelers, who had laughed at her earlier, were clapping, some awkwardly, some genuinely. She sat frozen for a moment, unsure how to respond. The host leaned toward her with a stunned smile. "That was amazing," he whispered. She finally looked up. The applause washed over her like warm light. She didn't smile yet. She didn't cry. She simply sat there, letting the sound reach her, letting herself feel it. And somewhere deep inside, she realized something very important. She hadn't lost her voice. That had only been waiting for her to find it again. The moment she stepped toward the piano, the room seemed to shift around her. It wasn't anything dramatic or loud. Nothing exploded. No one gasped, and no spotlight magically appeared above her head. But something in the air changed, something small and quiet, like a breath being held. Maybe no one else noticed, but she felt it deep in her chest. Her hands were trembling a little, and she wondered for a split second why she was even doing this. She could have ignored the teasing comments. She could have kept walking, kept pretending she didn't hear the jokes thrown her way. It would have been easier, but something inside her refused to shrink this time. She stepped up to the piano as the room settled into a half-curious, half-amused silence. The group that had been laughing at her earlier still wore smirks, as if waiting for a joke to unfold. One of them whispered something under their breath, and the rest chuckled. But she didn't turn toward them. She didn't respond at all. Her focus stayed on the piano. It looked bigger up close, polished, but worn from years of musicians tapping its keys. She gently ran her fingers along the edge, almost like she was greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in a long time. She hadn't touched a piano in years, not since life pushed her away from dreams and toward bills and double shifts. But the sight of it stirred something inside her that she thought she had lost. She lowered herself onto the bench. Her knees were shaking. Her heart raced so fast, it felt like it might leap out of her chest. She curled her fingers over the keys, but didn't press anything yet. She just breathed. The room wasn't fully quiet. A few forks clinked. Glasses tapped. Someone whispered. A tiny laugh escaped from the loud group. But mostly, people just watched, waiting to see if this waitress really intended to play. She took in one more breath, let it out slowly, and then finally pressed the first note. It was soft, gentle, almost too quiet. But something about that single note made a few heads tilt, made a couple of conversations pause. She pressed another, then another, and soon the soft notes shaped themselves into a melody she hadn't planned to play. She hadn't practiced it. She hadn't even thought of it in years. Yet her fingers found it easily, like they remembered it better than she did. The sound spread through the room in warm waves. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it had a depth that made people look up. It had a calm sadness mixed with something hopeful. Her fingers moved more confidently now, gliding over the keys. She wasn't thinking about the people watching, or the comments, or how nervous she had been just moments earlier. She was somewhere else, someplace where fear didn't matter and judgment didn't exist. For the first time in years, she felt free. The chatter around the room softened. Tables that had been laughing minutes before now sat quietly. Even the loud group shifted in their seats. Their smirks slowly faded as they watched her play. One of them lowered their drink, realizing they hadn't taken a sip in a while. Another leaned forward slightly. No one expected this. Her music wasn't flashy. It wasn't the kind of performance meant to impress people with speed or show-off skills. Instead, it felt real, honest, full of emotions she never said out loud. Every note told a small story of long days, forgotten dreams, quiet hopes she still held close even when she didn't admit it. Her hands moved faster now, more confident, more connected to what she was feeling. The melody rose gently, then dipped again, as if breathing in and out. The room seemed to breathe with it. Even the servers in the back slowed down, listening through the kitchen window. She didn't look up once. She didn't need to. The piano was enough. Halfway through, she felt something warm building in her chest. It wasn't nerves anymore. It was something sweet and familiar, a feeling she thought she had lost. When life became all about surviving instead of living. Her fingers danced over the keys without hesitation now. The room faded away until all that existed was her, the piano, and the sound filling the air. People leaned in closer. Some rested their chins on their hands. Others simply stared with wide eyes. One woman in the front blinked rapidly, as if holding back tears she didn't expect to feel. A man near the bar set down his drink carefully, afraid to interrupt even with a small sound dot. By the time she reached the final stretch of the melody, the room was silent. Completely silent. Not a single fork moved. No one whispered. Even the loud group, who had mocked her earlier, sat frozen, surprised into stillness. She played the closing notes softly, letting them fade like a sunset sinking into the horizon. She held the last note for a moment, then let it go. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of awe, full of emotion, full of the tension released by a room that had forgotten how to breathe for a few minutes. She didn't move at first. She kept her hands still on the keys, letting the quiet settle. She finally looked up, unsure what she would see. Laughter, confusion, indifference, anything. Instead, Every pair of eyes in the room was fixed on her. For a brief second, the world stood still. Then came the sound soft at first, like a single clap echoing in a hallway. Then a few more. And then suddenly, the whole room burst into applause. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't the kind people give just to be nice. It was loud, full, enthusiastic, and real. It filled the lounge in the same way her music had moments earlier. A few people stood up. Others cupped their hands around their mouths and cheered. Someone whistled. Another person tapped the table with excitement. The energy in the room flipped completely, shifting from amusement to admiration. Even the rowdy group who had teased her now looked stunned. One of them mouthed the word "wow," unable to believe what they had just heard. She blinked, overwhelmed. She didn't know what to do. It had been so long since anyone looked at her with anything other than impatience or indifference. Suddenly, she was the center of attention, and for the first time, it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt earned. Her face warmed. She lowered her head slightly, almost shyly, but she couldn't stop the small, genuine smile that formed. She hadn't planned any of this. She had only wanted to prove to herself more than anyone else that she was more than the jokes, more than the quiet girl with a tray of dishes. As the applause continued, she slowly stood up from the bench. Her legs felt lighter, as if some invisible weight had been lifted. She gave a small nod to the room, unsure how else to thank them. She didn't need words. The music had done the speaking. When she stepped off the stage, several people reached out to her with compliments. Others watched her with new respect. Even the lounge host gave her a look filled with pleasant surprise. She didn't linger in the spotlight. She just quietly returned to her duties, but everything felt different now. The air felt lighter. The room felt brighter. And most importantly, something inside her she thought she lost long ago felt alive again. Had touched the piano for just a few minutes, but those few minutes changed everything. The applause still echoed, faintly in her ears long after she stepped off the stage. She didn't try to cling to it or replay it in her mind. She just let the moment exist, floating somewhere inside her like a small, warm light. She wasn't used to that kind of attention, certainly not the kind filled with admiration instead of impatience. But she didn't hide from it either. Something about it made her stand a little taller as she walked back toward the service station. People watched her now, not out of amusement, not to mock her, but with a new spark of curiosity, even respect. Some tried to catch her eye as she passed, offering small smiles or whispers of praise. A few clapped again quietly when she walked near their tables, as if still amazed by what had happened. She gently nodded back when someone complimented her. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to receiving kind words, especially not from strangers. She had gone so long being invisible that her voice felt small when she tried to use it. Still, the energy in the room had completely changed. It felt warmer, softer. Even the usual Friday night buzz carried a different tone. The lounge host walked up to her with a stunned grin. "Where have you been hiding that?" they asked, almost laughing in disbelief. She shrugged shyly, her eyes lowering for a moment. The host shook their head, still amazed. "If you ever want a spot on the schedule, just say the word." She nodded, though she wasn't sure if she meant yes, or if she was simply overwhelmed. The offer felt surreal. She hadn't imagined anything like this would happen when she came in for her shift. She had planned to serve tables, wipe counters, collect tips, and go home tired, like every other night. Not step on stage. Not play again. Not be heard. She picked up her serving tray and returned to her duties. But everyone's reactions followed her from table to table. Some guests asked if she had been trained professionally. Others wondered why she didn't perform full time. A few even asked when she would play again that night down at one table, a woman leaned forward and said in a soft voice, "The way you played, it felt like you were telling a story." The words stayed with her. She didn't know how to reply, but something about hearing that made her chest tighten with quiet emotion. She thanked the woman, then stepped away before her feelings spilled over. She couldn't let herself get too carried away. There was still work to do. Even the loud group that had laughed at her earlier sat quietly now. They weren't rowdy anymore. They weren't making jokes or trying to get attention. They looked almost embarrassed as she approached their table with their check. One of them cleared their throat awkwardly. "Hey, listen, we didn't know you could play like that." Another nodded, rubbing the back of their neck. "Yeah, that was really something." A third added, "Sorry about before." She didn't hold resentment. She didn't even feel anger. Their laughter earlier had hurt, but it no longer weighed on her. She simply gave a polite, quiet nod and said, "It's all right." And the strange thing was, she meant it. She moved through the rest of her shift with an unusual calm. The night didn't feel long. Her steps didn't feel heavy. For once, she wasn't counting down the hours until closing time. Something within her had shifted, as if she had discovered a missing part of herself she thought had disappeared forever. When the dining room finally grew quieter, she grabbed a cloth and began wiping down empty tables. She could still see the piano from where she worked, sitting under a soft pool of light. It didn't look intimidating anymore. It looked inviting, familiar, almost comforting. The lounge host approached her again as she wiped a polished wooden table. "You know," they said, "people haven't clapped like that in months. Maybe longer." She gave a shy smile. "I'm glad they liked it." Liked it? They were blown away. They laughed lightly. "Seriously, if you want to play here again, just tell me. We'll make space on the schedule." The idea seemed too big to answer right away. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just said, "I'll think about it." After the last guests left, after the chairs were stacked and the floor was swept, she walked back to the piano one more time. She didn't sit down, but she placed a hand on the top of it. Gently running her fingers along the smooth surface dot, it amazed her that something she had almost forgotten could still feel so right. When she finally left the restaurant, the night air felt cool against her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself as she walked home, but she didn't feel cold. She felt more awake than she had in years. Her small apartment was quiet when she walked in. She set her bag down, took off her shoes, and sank onto her couch with a long, deep breath. She stared at the wall, but she didn't really see it. Her mind was still inside the lounge, replaying the moment her fingers touched the keys. That melody. She hadn't heard it in so long. It had come out of her hands, like it had been waiting all this time. As she sat there, she felt a tiny surge of excitement, something pure and fragile, something she didn't want to lose again. She leaned back on the couch and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine what life could look like if she didn't only serve tables, if she didn't only work late nights for tips, if she didn't push her dreams aside just to survive. Maybe, just maybe, she could play again, not as a job, not as a fantasy, but as something real. The next day, the shift felt different from the beginning. When she walked in, the kitchen staff cheered for her softly, teasing her in a kind, supportive way she wasn't used to. They clapped lightly, calling her the star of last night. She flushed with embarrassment, but she couldn't deny the warmth she felt from their kindness. Even the owner, who rarely noticed anything besides numbers and schedules, came out of the office to speak to her. "I heard about what you did," he said with a nod. "Good work last night. Really good." It wasn't a dramatic compliment, but coming from him, It was huge dot as the evening went on. Guests from the night before returned. Some of them asked if she would be playing again. Others simply wanted to tell her how much they enjoyed hearing her music. One family even said their child couldn't stop talking about the waitress who played the piano like magic. She didn't know how to respond to that. Her cheeks warmed again. Word traveled fast. Too fast. By the middle of her shift, a few people she didn't recognize came in and asked, "Is the girl who played last night here?" She felt nervous all over again, but also something else gratitude. She never expected any of this. She never imagined people would come just to hear her play, or even ask about her at all, near the end of the night. When the crowd thinned and the energy softened, the lounge host approached her once more. "There's an open spot next weekend," they said gently. "No pressure. You don't even need to say yes tonight. Just think about it." She swallowed. Her heart beat harder than she expected. "Okay," she whispered. That night, walking home under the streetlights, she replayed the host's words. A spot next weekend. A chance to play again. A chance to be seen not as someone bringing water to tables, but as someone who had something to offer. When she reached her apartment, she unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stood still for a moment. It was quiet, but not the heavy kind of quiet she used to come home to. This silence felt hopeful. She walked to the drawer where she kept a few old things from her younger days. Inside it, under a folded scarf and some forgotten notebooks, she found sheet music she hadn't touched in years. Sheets filled with songs she had once poured her heart into. She held them gently, like they might crumble from age. Her fingers brushed over the fading pencil marks she had written long ago. Notes, reminders, scribbles of ideas. Dreams she had abandoned, but never truly erased. She sat on the edge of her bed, holding the pages close. Maybe she wasn't done. Maybe the world wasn't done hearing her. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to believe in herself. Again, the week that followed felt different from anything she had lived in a long time. Nothing around her changed physically. The same small apartment, the same streets she walked every day, the same restaurant, the same routine. But inside her, something had shifted. Every morning she woke up with a small spark of excitement that hadn't existed before. It was almost strange, like rediscovering a part of herself she had misplaced years ago. At work, she felt more noticed. Not in a loud way. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable. But people looked at her with kinder eyes, with a quiet curiosity that made her feel seen. Some guests returned just to ask if she would be playing again. Others told their friends to come in because the waitress who played the piano was something worth experiencing. She didn't let the attention go to her head. She kept doing her job with the same care she always had, but there was a lighter energy in her steps. Even the owner, who rarely expressed emotion, seemed warmer toward her. It was small and extra gnawed, a slightly softer tone, but she noticed. The lounge host checked in with her every day, gently reminding her that the spot for next weekend was still open if she wanted it. They didn't pressure her. They simply offered reassurance. "You don't have to make it perfect," they said one evening. "People just want to hear you. That's enough." She didn't answer right away. She still felt unsure. Not because she didn't want to play, she did, but because it felt like such a big step. What if she wasn't good enough the second time? What if the first performance had only felt special because it was unexpected? What if she disappointed everyone? Still, the idea tugged at her that whole week. Whenever she had a moment alone, she found herself thinking about the piano. She would touch her fingers to tabletops or glide them through the air, imagining melodies she hadn't played in forever. Sometimes she hummed softly to herself when no one was around, rediscovering rhythms she had forgotten. One night, after her shift, she stayed behind instead of going straight home. The staff had already left. The chairs were stacked, and the lights were dim. But the lounge host was still there, gathering scheduling papers. "You want a little time with it?" they asked with a gentle smile. Nodding toward the piano dat, she hesitated before nodding. "Take all the time you need," they said before heading to the back office dot. She approached the piano slowly. The room felt peaceful, almost sacred. She sat down quietly, placing her hands on the keys. She didn't start with anything complicated. She just pressed a few soft notes, letting their sound fill the empty room. In the quiet, she realized something. She missed this. Not the applause, not the attention, just the feeling of creating sound with her own hands. The simple act of touching the keys made her feel alive. She played for almost an hour. Not loudly, not perfectly, but honestly. When she finally stood from the bench, her heart felt calm. She walked out of the restaurant with a small but certain feeling. She wanted to play again. The next evening, she found the lounge host and said, in a quiet voice, "I'll take the spot this weekend." The host's smile grew wide. "I'm glad," they said. "People will be too." News spread quickly around the staff, but they didn't overwhelm her with excitement. Instead, they encouraged her gently, telling her they were proud of her and that she was going to do great. As the weekend approached, she felt nerves mixed with excitement. She wasn't afraid of the piano, she was afraid of failing. But she kept reminding herself that she wasn't doing this to impress anyone. She was doing it because it made her feel alive. The night of the performance came faster than she expected. The restaurant filled earlier than usual. She could hear the buzz of conversation from the kitchen. People were asking if she was really playing again. Some guests came in just for dinner, but others clearly came for the music. When the lounge host approached her quietly and said, "It's time," her stomach flipped. She wiped her hands on her apron, took a breath, and stepped out from behind the counter. The room fell into a soft hush when she appeared. Not completely silent, but attentive, curious, warm. She walked to the piano, her steps small but steady. She sat down gently, letting the room settle around her. Her hands hovered above the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Then she played. This time, the melody was different, calmer, deeper, more confident. It wasn't as fragile as the first performance. It carried warmth and strength, as if she was sharing not just her music, but her heart. People leaned into the sound. Conversations faded until the room was wrapped in her notes. Even the kitchen staff peeked out from behind the door. The owner stood in the back, arms crossed but eyes soft. Her music filled every corner of the lounge. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't something meant to show off. It was simply beautiful, simple, honest, and full of emotion. As she played, she felt herself relax. Her hands moved freely. Her breathing slowed. A small, content smile formed without her realizing. She didn't feel nervous anymore. She felt whole. When she reached the final note, she let it linger. The room stayed still. Then the applause came louder than last time. People stood. Some clapped above their heads. Others tapped the tables with excitement. The loud group from last week, who had returned quietly and respectfully, stood too. She sat frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the warmth around her. But slowly she stood and gave a small nod. Her smile was soft, but it lit her whole face. After the show, people approached her again, but this time she didn't shrink back. She listened. She spoke a little. She accepted their words. She let herself feel the joy. Later that night, after the last table cleared and the lights dimmed, the owner walked toward her. "You did well," he said simply. "If you ever want to make this a regular thing, we can arrange that." Her breath caught, but she nodded. "I'd like that," she said, and she meant it. When she walked home under the quiet sky, She didn't feel tired the way she usually did after a shift. She felt light, almost floating. The streetlights glowed soft and warm, and the cool air wrapped around her gently when she reached her apartment. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and paused. Her small home felt different, still quiet, still simple, but filled now with a comforting hope. She sat on her couch, looked down at her hands, and smiled. They no longer felt like hands meant only for carrying trays or scrubbing plates. They felt like hands meant to create something. She knew life wouldn't magically become easy. Bills would still come. Shifts would still be long. Challenges wouldn't disappear. But now she had something she thought she had lost long ago. A voice, a dream, a place where she wasn't invisible. The girl who everyone ignored, the waitress who blended into the background, had stepped into the light, not because someone pushed her, but because she found the courage to step forward on her own. She had touched the piano once, then again, and now it was part of her future. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming someone again. And deep in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning.